It's all good. Let me make sure my audio is good. All right, hang on. Let me make sure they can hear you. Can you give me a quick audio check?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Ah,
7, 8, 9, 10.
there we go. There we go. Apes, we have a special guest today. We have Carol Roth. I mean, I was doing a little bit of research on you, and you're definitely defined as a woman who tells it how it is. You're defined as a national media personality, an author. You have some expertise in the investment banking world, and you really caught the attention of the ape community when you were speaking with Fox, and you were doing exactly that. You were telling it how it is, and first of all, thank you so much for coming on. And right now, there's thousands and thousands of people who are just kind of interested in your, I guess, let's call it your professional opinion of what's been going on in Wall Street, the kind of slanted, nefarious nature that you're seeing, the things that we can do to fight against that. Let's dive into it. I know you're an author. You just came out with the book. I see it in the background right there. So let's just dive into all of it. So if you just kind of want to start it off, give people your background and kind of why we're talking with you today.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this platform and for sort of highlighting some of the things that I've been talking about. As you said, I'm sort of known as a truth teller. But I also want to say that I want to thank the ape community. I've
Mhm.
just been sort of introduced to everybody. Not only are you just so gracious, but I want to let you know that I respect you and I respect what you're doing, and I want everyone to be successful. And so, as I talk about my background and as we have this discussion, I think that the takeaway here is that we're going to agree fundamentally on principle about capitalism being bastardized and things that are going out with Main Street being sold out to Wall Street. We may not agree on all of the mechanisms and the
Mhm.
little details, and I think that's okay. But I just want you to know I'm coming from a place of transparency. I've got nothing in this game other than I'm just somebody who likes to be helpful and to tell the truth.
Okay.
And fortunately, I'm in a financial position where I'm fine and I don't need to worry about it. So I work for myself. I'm not on anybody's payroll other than my own.
Gotcha.
One of my clients, as you can see in the background, is a toy company. I actually, if you see here, I have my own action figure. So I just kind of want to get that out. And as you uncover things about me and you say, oh, well, she was an investment banker, she's this and that, we'll talk a little bit about that. I just encourage you, just feel free to ask a question, because a lot of times people like to try to paint things into a corner that aren't as it
Mm.
seems. There's a lot of nuance that gets lost here, which is I think part of the struggle here. So my background is that I was born to a family, mom and dad, who neither of them graduated from college. My dad was an electrician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, who eventually went into sort of like a hobby business. And I
Mhm.
was really lucky to become the first person in my family to go to college. Actually, Matt, was in your neck of the woods. I went to Wharton undergrad
Okay, awesome.
and paid my way primarily through school, came out with $40,000 in college debt, which for some of you may seem a little bit low these days, but that was back in 1995. So, inflation.
Mhm.
And it was able to get a job in investment banking, or quote unquote on Wall Street, even though I chose to work in San Francisco instead of New York. And I think sometimes we talk about these concepts like Wall Street and everything gets lumped in together. And
Mhm.
there's so many different functions and a lot of very important functions that sometimes aren't, again, nuanced, aren't separated from the others. So the part of investment banking that I worked in is that I helped companies that were rapidly growing raise capital, everything from private placements to initial public offerings to secondary offerings and whatnot, and a lot of names of companies that you've all been to: the Cheesecake Factory, Papa John's Pizza, Planet Hollywood, Rainforest Cafe. Like, if you were a restaurant company in the mid to late 90s that got financing, I probably worked on it. I also worked on tech deals and consumer product deals and whatnot. And it was an important function. We helped those companies raise money so that they could expand and grow their businesses, which is, that's good capitalism. We all
Yeah.
want that. We all want to see that happening. And that is part of Wall Street. Um, But one of the things that I noted when I was an investment banker is that, I would get a lot of calls from small businesses who didn't have the money to pay for the same kind of advice the big businesses did, and they were just getting terrible advice. So when I became more financially flexible, to speak, I did very well in investment banking, and I had the ability to then kind of do what I wanted to do. I wanted to find a way to serve the people who weren't getting the great advice. And that's one of the things that drove me into media, because I figured, oh, media is a great platform because I can reach, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people with the kind of advice that they wouldn't get otherwise from somebody who is credible. So that's kind of the background. I am definitely somebody who's like on the move, full of energy, does a ton of stuff. So, like, as I said, I work with a toy company as an outsourced chief customer officer. I sit on boards, I make investments, I'm on television multiple times a week. I've been a judge on a reality technology competition show that was for Mark Burdett. I do all kinds of things because I'm interested in things. But the reason why this is also very personal to me is I go back to my dad. Both of my parents, unfortunately, are passed, and my dad was my best friend, and he was so sort of invested in the American dream because he came from a really poor family, and he found a way to work up and make a better life and create an opportunity. And he couldn't believe kind of the opportunity that I have and where I became today. And I believe in the fundamental structure of free market capitalism. And I believe everybody can be successful, and I want everyone to be successful, but only if the rules of capitalism are in place so that we can have free markets. And unfortunately, which leads into, I think, the conversation you want to have, is that across the board, whether it's with the retail investors versus big businesses within the markets, whether it's small business versus big business sort of competing on Main Street, and what we saw happen over the last year, that's been taken away. We have moved away from capitalism towards cronyism, towards this centralization of power. And that's why I love what you guys are doing so much, because it's taking this decentralized position. It's all the individuals coming together and saying, we have a purpose and we're strong and we're going to do something about it. And so it's incredibly inspiring to me. And it's the same fight that I'm fighting, even though it may be, we may be in slightly different battlefields at the same time, but it's the same fight. And it's an important fight because everybody should have the opportunity. And in true free market capitalism, everybody wins. Like it's a growing pie. It's not one versus the other. So we need to preserve that so everybody can have the opportunity that they should have.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that across the board. I mean, right now, from what I've just seen, like anecdotally speaking with people, I think this entire thing has taken on I like to refer to it as a psychological wildfire of like the virality of what's going on, because the story itself just, it really resonates with people at such a deeply human level of what's going on right now. And even when I see the analytics on my social media, the age group is very, very interesting. I see the age group of people who are directly impacted by 2008, 2009, or their parent directly was. That's exactly my demographic. And right there, I mean, I even had those, I have those awkward memories of 2008 and 2009. I was there with my family, friends. And what happened was everyone was just discussing like what was going on. And it's like, well, it's just paper losses, but it was a lot of paper losses. It's just people that like their 401ks were disappearing into the ether. And if you were retiring in that year, that couple year time frame, it was so incredibly brutal. And like, so that was kind of my first thing of like, and I remember learning about Occupy Wall Street. I was a little bit too young. And I think you were referring it to as this of like, I was watching your clip this morning that you were posting, and it was exactly that of just, this is another form of Occupy Wall Street. I think it's that exact same psychology. It's just now playing out in a different battlefield. And it right now happened, it was GameStop. It's still kind of GameStop, but we're seeing it a lot with AMC. The community is so big. And I think it's because of that, of like people are just so upset with how things have been going on. And of course, we can get into the weeds of like shorting, naked shorting and all that. But I think why it's so popular right now is because on the big level, it's that narrative of David and Goliath and that underdog story. And so many people are going to fight for that because of course you're going to fight for like fairness. For me, I want capitalism. I want free market capitalism. So to me, this isn't a knock on what I believe capitalism to be. It's a knock on like, I guess, some of the ways people can take advantage of it and turn it into cronyism. I really liked how you define that, because that's what it is. It's a pay to play. If you're in that elitist group, it works super, super well for you. But if you're not, well, that sucks. Like you just like weren't in the position, and like good luck, play, like see you next time.
I've got a perfect analogy. And first of all, the Occupy Wall Street, because I never like to take credit for things that aren't mine. That was actually one of the apes who responded on Twitter, came up with this sort of Occupy Wall Street that was happening online. So I like kind of slightly repackaged it, but like that came from your community. I'm just trying to lend a voice to it. So I just want to be clear about that. But here's a perfect example. And again, I use sort of the small business to big business analogy, same way we talk about retail investor with some of the professional investors. If you think about Amazon, so when they were trying to find a new headquarters, they went out and had this beauty pageant, and they went to all different cities across the country and said, what can you do for us? What will you give us? We want, we're going to locate here. And they were like, you could have the naming rights to our city. You can have our firstborn kid. You can have like whatever. Like, imagine you're a small business. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. Imagine you went to like the mayor of Philly, like, what could you give me? Like, you couldn't even get a return phone call. And that's not right. That's not capitalism. I have no problem with Amazon being successful, even though they're bigger, on the merits of being bigger and letting people choose convenience versus personalization. I have a huge problem when they start promising them special perks that you're not getting as a small business that has more risk and less access to capital. And those are the kinds of things that seem small, but they really add up. And that's gotten us to the point where we're having this huge battle of centralized power and control versus decentralization. And the last 15 months just accelerated that so much. I mean, we saw in 2020, 400,000 small businesses had shut down by June. Millions more were affected. People are out of work. At the same time, 7 tech companies gained 3.4 trillion in value. You had a record year for IPOs. You had a record year for SPACs, which we can talk about. So like, how do you do that? And that's because the government's out there picking winners and losers, and government, big business, powerful people, that triumvirate is consolidating that power, because they think us as individuals and small businesses are either too small to matter or too hard to control. I don't care what you think. I don't care if you think it's intentional or unintentional. I don't need to convince you of that. But you have to know the big banks, when they did bad things, were too big to fail. But now, out of no fault of our own, we're too small to matter or too hard to control. That's a power imbalance. And the things that you guys are doing, coming together, as this sort of decentralized group of people saying this isn't fair, like this is what it's all about. So jazzed about you guys.
It's funny you brought that up. I was actually in the DC area when Amazon was specifically shopping for like the next HQ2, and that's where they ended up picking, was like, I think Crystal City in the DC area, and it was nuts, the things going on, like, and like the other, I guess let's call them medium tier businesses that can build off of that. Even that, like leases were going insane, just on the exception that they were there. Like so much, like, I guess, like you said, it's the big players who are making these decisions of what's going on. And if you're like a smaller entrepreneur like myself, or a smaller business just in general, it's just a completely different, it's not even a different playing field. It's a completely different league. It's a completely different sport.
Like they just, rules. They've said, okay, you're playing by this set of rules, and then we're just going to have this set of rules, and they're the referees. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense, but it's bad.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. So in terms of business, and I guess what you saw with business and investment banking, what are some of the most egregious things that you would point to, just in terms of more of Wall Street, of that type of thing, of where it's just like, we are not playing the same game, that we think we're playing the same game, but like, I guess with more of your professional background, of just like, what are the things that we don't even know that we don't know?
So what I want to say is that the markets have morphed. So when I hate to tell you, I know I look fantastic, but I'm old. So when I started out, like 25, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it is at this point in time, They were different. It was a little bit more orderly. It's like kind of gotten out of control on multiple levels. I would say one thing that would be really interesting for you guys to look into. It's a fascinating story. It's one that I cannot believe that when I talk to people, they don't know. But have you heard about the $1 billion whale story?
No.
Okay. So $1 billion whale, which read the book. It's a phenomenal, it's like you'll
$1 billion.
literally go, like, how did this happen? It is the biggest financial scam that has ever been perpetrated. And it was aided and abetted, sorry guys, by Goldman Sachs. And they actually got, I think it was the biggest fine in investment banking history, finally, but it's been so quiet. So there's this guy, his name was Jolo, and he was from Asia originally. He went to Wharton. Ooh, sorry, it happens. And he kind of just played like, oh, I have all these connections. And he was very kind of savvy at putting things together. And he got into cahoots with the president at the time of Malaysia. And they were going to create this sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB, which you probably have heard of.
Yeah,
okay?
I've heard of that.
And so, he started getting all of these other sovereign wealth funds involved. And then he like started taking the money, and he was like hanging out with Leonardo DiCaprio and Paris Hilton. They financed the Wolf of Wall Street movie, which is like, like you can't even make this stuff up. And, they got Goldman Sachs to basically be an underwriter to help to continue to bring money in. And the reason that Goldman should know better is that within investment banks and Wall Street firms, there's something called a commitment committee. And so when you take on a client and you're going to do something like an IPO or an underwriting, like you have a group of people. And again, when I was coming up, like it was really stringent. I mean, there are certain companies they wouldn't take public that were good companies, but they just didn't feel like they had those metrics. Now it's like, whatever, like we're going to make fees. The fees that they were making for this raise were like exponentially higher than any comparable fee that they would ever make. So you'd have to know, sitting on that committee, that there was something shady going on. And they were just kind of like, whatever. And to the things that you guys are talking about, like the fees that they had to pay versus what actually happened, a lot of times don't even out. So that's just like one example that which again is just a wild story. And the journalists who were at the Wall Street Journal at the time who uncovered this did such a phenomenal job of like basically tracing the finances to these shell companies and all this stuff that like everyone else wasn't willing to do. And so that's it. It's that kind of that due diligence piece that you guys are doing with some of these stocks. They were doing this with, okay, like where is this like sovereign wealth money going, and how's Paris Hilton and Miranda Kerr involved, like all these like really weird things. But it's a fascinating and fun and maddening read all wrapped up into one. But that just kind of gives you a sense of some of the things that we're talking about. And again, it's like it's persistent, but it's not widespread, if that makes sense. So it's something that continually happens, and you'll find things different places. It's not everything in the system. Like the entire system isn't 100% flawed, but it's got enough of it that it's really tilting that playing field, as we talked about. So I think that's the things. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to go like, we got to get rid of the whole stock market. Like it's important. We've got people's 401ks and pension funds invested in it, and it's a great opportunity, but we have to make it fair. And I think that those are the things that we need to continue to talk about.
Yeah, just to drive into like one of those points, I think you were mentioning of like, I do believe that there is a time and place for shorting. Right now, like you use the example of Luckin Coffee, of like that was a faulty company. It was like they just like were reporting false numbers. It was a big lie. And sometimes you have these shorts and the short thesis that they come out and find it. Like I am personally not against shorting at like just a theoretical level, because I think sometimes you find out bad actors. You see it a lot more in like, say, for example, the penny stock world. Like there's been some stories I've read about penny stocks that like they exclusively only existed in paperwork. They had no product, they had nothing. They just filled out the paperwork to trade on the OTC market, and that was it. It was a complete scam. So I'm not against it. It's just more of when it's done abusively and to a degree to drive a stock into the ground beyond that. And it's kind of funny. We see this a lot on mainstream media, specifically in this community right now of, I think it's almost like an antiquated fundamental analysis of like, oh, you can only be in stocks that you want to hold for 5, 10, 15 years, like whatever. That's the thing of like, fundamentally, where is AMC going? And I think that's where mainstream media is really getting this movement wrong, because right now we get it. We're in it for momentum play, a swing play. We want to see what happens with the shorts. Yeah, there is a time and place to discuss AMC as a fundamental investment on the backside of this, for sure. I'm happy with that. But right now, like, they'll argue about that and like they'll take words out of like context of like, oh, like they don't believe in fundamentals. Like, that's okay. Like, part of this is, don't tell us what to do with our money. Like, it's our money. We want to put it where we want. If I want to bet on AMC, I should be free to do that. But it's just like, it's such a pompous attitude of like, no, like, I have the degree, I work on Wall Street, you should invest in what I tell you to, and like agree with it. And then you have all these people who like are, frankly, we're just hanging out on our couches with like on our phone trading and buying, and we're just causing such an immense headache. And like, when I started this, I thought it was kind of a joke. I'm like, oh, there's no way like they're paying attention to me. And when I'll say that, just because like I'm on YouTube, I'm a 26-year-old talking about these stocks. And then once in a while, I'll get a DM from a CIO. They're like, no, we bought AMC too. I'm like, you're watching me on YouTube? Like, I'm like actual CIOs, chief investment officers from hedge funds have been like, no, we're in it too. We watch your YouTube. I'm like, this is so comically out of hand, and I love every single second of it.
No, it's amazing, and kudos to you. And I'll share a story when you talk about sort of the abuse of shorting. So as I mentioned on my piece with Charles, and Charles Payne, guys, is amazing. He's one of my longtime friends. I've known him for probably a dozen years. He's always been a champion for the little guy, and he's really kind to kind of give a platform. And when he asked me, it's like, hey, like, what should we talk about in here? And I said, well, I think it is important to distinguish between, what's good shorting and what becomes abusive. And I had a situation, probably, my dates are a little fuzzy, like 2014, 2015. Maybe it was 20. No, actually, it was way before that. Sorry. Maybe 2012, 2013. I don't know. It was a long time ago, kids. Anyway, so there was a company called Herbalife. And I don't know if you're familiar with Herbalife, but it's this multi-level marketing company. And like, listen, multi-level marketing is what it is, but I am a proponent of capitalism. And I think that sometimes when people are trying to get into business, it's easier to try something out on a small scale and to see if they're good at it, see if they're good at the selling before they dump their entire 401k into opening a business. Oh, which, by the way, we learned in the last 15 months could be just shut down at the whim of the government. So Bill Ackman, which may be a name that you guys know from Pershing Square, who is a very well-known hedge fund investor, and I have nothing against him personally. I think he's done made a lot of very smart trades, and so I just again say this from a neutral position, just on this specific set of actions, is that he went after Herbalife. And he went after them, as a short, published all this research that he thought that they were a fraud, which I didn't agree with and stayed my piece. But then I felt like, and again, it's my opinion, that he was using people he knew in different investigative areas and whatnot to put pressure on the company to try to make this fraud narrative happen. And I spent a really long time, all the way back in the day, like this is kind of like reminiscent of when I was your age, guys, that I stood up and said, this is BS. Like this is, they're putting, you don't have to like the company, but there's nothing fraudulent. People are joining up for this and doing this because they want to do this. There's no gun held to their heads. And I didn't like the tactics. I felt those tactics were, again, in my opinion, abusive. And that's the kind of shorting that I don't like. And I think that sometimes when people are trying to get into business, it's easier to try something out on a small scale and to see if they're good at it, see if they're good at the selling before they dump their entire 401k into opening a business. Oh, which, by the way, we learned in the last 15 months could be just shut down at the whim of the government. So I wanted to stand up against. And I made a big stink, and people were like, who the hell? Like, what are you talking about? And ended up actually making people a lot of money because I made the call, same kind of thing. When the stock was really depressed, I said, I think this is the stock of the year. And lo and behold, the next year it went up. And I rarely make a call like that, but it was so clear that that was going to happen. And, it's kind of fallen off my radar. I don't really know what's going on with the company today, but eventually he had to give up the fights. Like, eventually he was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we're talking about, is every once in a while, like, somebody gets a bee in their bonnet about something. And then it goes from, hey, I'm trying to expose this, or just we don't believe in the value, to this is like a personal vendetta against this company. And I think it is important to have people who are willing to stand up for that. So that's one thing I wanted to say about that. The other thing about, kind of valuations and doing what you want with your money, part of the issue here is that the whole concept of valuations has been thrown out the window because the market has been completely disrupted by the Federal Reserve. And this is something I talk about in the book, and one of the things I'm really proud about is talking about this in layman's terms so people really understand what the Federal Reserve is. But if you think about the whole concept of naked shorting, right? The whole idea that you're creating this share out of nowhere.
So
The
USD.
Federal Reserve is doing the same freaking thing, but instead of doing it for millions of dollars or billions of dollars, they're doing trillions of dollars. And they have injected trillions of dollars of naked short, fake money into the market that has made the stocks that you're investing in more expensive. So instead of giving you guys a fair shake to get in at a fair valuation, you're getting in at a higher valuation. They've given companies that have absolutely no business raising money the ability to stay alive. They're called zombie companies that can't even service their debts, let alone the interest on their debt, let alone their principal, the ability to stay alive, at the expense of people investing in innovation. And they've thrown people like savers and retirees that count on fixed income under the bus and completely disrupted risk in the market. So if you really, if you hate naked shorting, wait till you find out what the Federal Reserve has been doing. By the way, they control the money supply. And so, it's that kind of disruption in the market also that enables the big guys to win and the little guys to lose. And that's kind of the next level stuff that I'm fighting for. And one of the things that I talk about in this book is war on small business.
Yeah, I mean, with that, just for the listeners who haven't heard of this, in 2008, 2009, to get us out of that, the Federal Reserve has done this before. I think it was about $4 trillion to kind of backstop the economy, get us going again. To get us out of the most recent year of 2020 when everything went belly up, it's exponentially more. There's just more money in the system. So the way when I'm talking to all of you about when naked shorting, you're increasing the supply, demand stays the same. Obviously the price drops. What they're doing on the bigger macroeconomic scale is even worse because the way they're backstopping it, they're increasing the supply. So the US dollar drops. But don't forget with stocks, it's pushing all those higher. So not only are they more expensive, but it's actually even more expensive because the USD is dropping. Exactly. So it just for two, on a double level, it's very, very bad. And what it is, I get it. They're doing the best they can to keep our economy going. But the can that they're creating and kicking down the road is like a barrel of gasoline, and the flame is not far behind it.
They're not doing the best. So this is where I'm going to disagree with you. They're not doing the best they can. They are protecting their cronies. And this is the issue, right? The first thing that happened when we had COVID, first of all, information leaked out to hedge funds before anybody knew on Main Street that there was going to be a problem with COVID in the US. And if you remember back in February of 2020, there was this huge drop in the market. And that's because information was given to a select group of people who made the trades first. Then the Fed decided that they were going to come out and do these emergency rate increases or decreases to prop up the market. So they propped up the stock market before people on Main Street got $1. You were getting your restaurant shut down, you're getting your gym shut down, but they propped up the stock market, and they kept doing it, over and over and over again. You're like, oh, okay, well maybe they needed to do some of that. But here's the thing: it's just like food for thought. If the stock market had felt some more pain, if Amazon's warehouse wasn't deemed essential and had to close just like your small business did, I don't think the lockdowns would have lasted more than 2 or 3 weeks. What
Mm,
they did is that they said, well, you big guys can continue on. We'll just put the pain on these small guys. And so they basically let it go on forever because they weren't, not only weren't they personally affected, they were actually getting the business and they were getting the stock bump from that. And then when they had these other emergency funds, they started investing in these ETFs that owned the stock of big companies like Apple and Microsoft. So it's like you're not supporting companies that are in jeopardy, like the AMCs of the world, right?
mhm.
That's something you shut down and said people can't go to the theater. They were like investing in these like high growth companies. So if you're bought into that the powerful people are taking care of the powerful people, start following the money train on that.
So I guess with all of that though, like it seems like at every level, the massive level of the Federal Reserve, I mean, you were talking about people selling, there's that entire list of politicians who sold in February. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how dumb do they think we are when like there's a list of politicians who are like, I sold because I thought it was a good time. And then 2 weeks later, 1 week later, there's like one of the most notable drops. But like, I guess with that, at each level, the Fed, the government, and then the middle level of institutions, Wall Street's, hedge funds, and then the smaller level of like specifically AMC, GME, if we see, I get what you're saying that across the board, it's not 100% malicious. Like there are good players, but we see these pockets of like nefarious, illegal, illicit actions. It's like, we're currently in the fight for AMC, GME to hopefully get the SEC's attention of like, hey, what's going on? We think there's something suspicious here. But like, in your opinion, what's like, I guess, a useful way to fight back at all those different levels from like an individual stock all the way up to like, hey, this is not the free market capitalism we were promised?
All right. So the first thing I would say is build wealth, become successful, right? Become the people who control the game. You know, if we get good people who are, don't want to pull up the ladder behind them and believe in capitalism, like build wealth, guys. Just keep doing this. The way I will tell you that you build wealth is through ownership. So either you're building up your own business, you're going to work for a company that's private, whether it's owned by private equity or VC that's eventually going to go public, and you ask for options or shares and you get an ownership stake of that business. Or you do what you're doing now is you start investing in companies and build your portfolio. And, I think obviously we're talking about specific fights over a couple names, but start building up a diversified portfolio over time, build wealth, especially for those of you who are young. Over time, even though things are going to go down, but they'll go back up again. And so just continually develop that habit and build wealth and support each other in building wealth, right? I mean, one of the things that you guys have that's so powerful here is you have a community that has each other's back. So if one of you makes chocolate bars, like go buy the chocolate bars
Mm.
from that person in your community and help them build wealth and help them hire more people that then joins the community and has money to spend within it, and like use your dollars to support each other. I mean, that is capitalism, right? It's voting with your dollars and supporting each other. So I think building wealth is one. I think the second, and this goes like specifically to AMC and GMA and the changes you want in the market, is I think it's really helpful to be specific. Like here are like our 3 specific demands, because it's one thing to say, financial treason and this is bad and whatever, but it's much easier to affect change if you have a couple of specific things. So I would say continue to work with people to build out, what is it in terms of the transparency here, which I think is one of the biggest issues that you want to see changed. And I think to have a free and fair market, there needs to be transparency. Everybody needs to know what's going on. So I think that's a good one. What I will caution against, though, and this is where you need to get some strategic minds here, and I think where things get bastardized, is that you have to think about all sides and the unintended consequences, because good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. And we'll go back to the last financial crisis, 07, 08. They created all of these rules that came out of there. Some of them were decent, called Dodd-Frank. But it was meant to rein in big banks, right? It was meant to rein in the action. what happened, because regulation is so anti-competitive and it hurts small entrants and smaller players that don't have enough money to comply with like these onerous regulation systems, is it actually ended up hurting the number of small banks and the small bank lending. So there were fewer new small bank startups. A lot of small and community banks went out of business, and less dollars were lent to small businesses, while the big banks prospered and big bank lending went through the roof, because now we said, hey, we need to rein in the big banks, but the legislation kept all the smaller players out. And that happens over and over again. It's why you see Mark Zuckerberg saying like, hey, regulate the internet. Like, it sounds good in theory, guys. But remember that the reason they want this regulation is because they know it's going to keep that next competitor out of the market. And so if you're really rooting for the small guys and you don't want this consolidation of power, you have to be really thoughtful about what you're asking for so that it doesn't end up moving in the wrong direction. That's one of the things that we're seeing. And then once you have your list of demands, look what you guys have accomplished here as a group. Like, imagine if you all picked up the phone and called your representative. Do you know how few people pick up the phone and call their representative? Like, nobody does it. If they get 15 or 20 calls, let alone 100 calls, they panic. Like, their office is like, oh, what? Okay, wait, hold it. Like, what's going on here? Like, what's happening? So use your power of this like amazing group and community that you've connected with to say, we have some really specific things that we think are important. We want more transparency, and this is specifically what we'd like to see. And just start with a couple things. You're not going to like fix the world overnight, but start with some small victories. Come up with a couple of things that you think are important. Lobby for those, make sure there's no thing on the other side that's going to end up screwing everybody else up. And this is where like brainstorming with different people is helpful, and come up with like, this is what we think is in the name of free fair market capitalism. This is why we think it's important. And it's so much easier to move the needle that way than to just like put out the anger. And I think that's one of the reasons that Occupy Wall Street the first time went wrong, and why a lot of the protests go wrong, because people kind of understand generally the concept, but they don't know what people want. And obviously when you have a big community, y'all want different things. So it's like coming up with just a prioritization of the things that would be the most helpful first, getting those done, tackling them, and then moving on to the next things. And sometimes just getting those couple, like 80-20 rule, right? Like, so just getting those couple things done solves 80% of the problems. So that's where I'd be focused. I would like, what are the few things around, transparency and, the market being slanted towards the big guys would be most helpful, that you feel like give you a better chance to participate and be as successful as you possibly can. And then let people like me know. I mean, as I said, I'm always happy to be a mouthpiece. This morning, I was so happy. I pitched Sinclair. They own the national desk. They've got morning shows, all across the nation on various stations that they own. And I said, I want to come and I want to tell the story of what's going on here with the ape army and why, and make you guys understand why they're so mad. And they said, okay, great. And they put it on in the first segment. And we just tweeted it out, and you guys reshared it, which was amazing. But like, we just got to, like, you were able to tell me and communicate to me, and I was able to synthesize it into that soundbite and put it out to play on like every syndicated station in America. Like, that's how these things have to happen. So that's, I don't know if you have any kind of feedback or concerns about that or thoughts about that.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, of like, we have to have a very coordinated, specific thing, because that's how you get things done. It's one thing, like you said, if we're all sitting here saying like, we want market fairness, well, the next logical question for any lawmaker out there, any politician, is like, okay, how do you specifically want fairness? I think that like really helps for a better definition of the movement, I guess, for like lack of a term.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And also like to the first part that you said about just like building wealth, it's like, well, the more wealth in right now, especially in America, the more wealth, the more power. So it all kind of like runs together. So I see that. And like, I guess the other thing, your note of caution of just like kind of understand that like when you ever make waves, you're going to have wake go out in every direction.
Yes.
And like we saw that on a very small scale of like the first time with GameStop. I'm not sure how closely you followed that, but Roaring Kitty, kind of the figure that was leading that, he ended up getting brought in front of the SEC for market manipulation. So that's like sometimes there is caution because it was just one guy that thought he was participating in the free market and he just told people what he was doing. Like he was not telling people to buy, not telling people to sell. And yet the SEC is like, well, now we need to look into him. It's like, what that.
Which is, by the way, BS. And again,
Yeah.
that goes back to the like, oh, that's an inconvenient loose end. We can't have that happening because he's not the power center. So totally BS.
And
but
like,
yes.
that almost makes me feel weird because when I thought of it, I was like, I never have to worry about it. And then even right now, as we're talking, there's 50,000 people. And I'm like, man, I'm always here talking about AMC and GME and I love it and I'm in it. But like, then it brings up like legitimate legal government concerns for me. And I was like, I don't need to deal with that. Like, that sounds like I don't know.
And this is the ongoing battle, right? I mean, people said it to me. It's like, oh, why don't you run for office? And I was like, oh, like, because I want people like making up lies about me and my family 24 hours a day for everybody to hate me because I vote against something called the Fluffy Puppy Bill that has nothing to do with fluffy puppies, but nobody's bothered to read it and say it's actually about murdering cats. You know, like whatever it is. Like people don't want the headache, and the big powerful people like, which is why when you have this decentralization, when you have all of you guys as an army, it's great because it spreads that risk out and it makes it a lot of voices and they kind of don't know where to turn, which is exactly, by the way, why they hate you and why they hate small business. and I say that, you know, again, being in the middle of this situation with you and advocating for the little guy. And even though I've done very well for myself, I still always feel like I'm that like blue collar person on the outside. Like I don't, you know, go around and like eat caviar and drink champagne with like fancy people, even though, you know, probably could if I wanted to. It's just not kind of my thing.
Yeah, well, we definitely appreciate the support. Before we let you go, could you tell us a little bit more about your book, specifically the title, where to get it, and like what it's all about?
Yes. Okay. So I just got them hot off the press. It's called The War on Small Business. I will tell you they're available wherever books are sold. But since again, I'm really like a big proponent of like support capitalism and support who you want to support, especially if you're in the US, there is a company called bookshop.org. And what bookshop.org does is it takes your order and it fulfills it from a local small business bookseller.
That's
so
awesome.
Instead of giving your business to the big guys, which again, I'm a capitalist, and if that's most convenient for you, like great, do it. But if you want to like really have small business advocacy, then you go and you give it to bookshop.org and they'll fulfill it from your local bookshop so that stays in business. So that's just an idea. But you know why this came about is I was approached by HarperCollins very early in the pandemic because right as things kind of heated up, I knew immediately that small business was going to get thrown under the bus. As soon as they were kind of talking about aid packages and you know maybe that some of the businesses shutting down, I wrote an entire piece and I said, here's how you do it. Here's how you finance the small businesses to keep people on their payroll. So you pay people to stay home, but be employed, and you keep those businesses open. And then you spend whatever it is, a couple weeks, a month, 2 months to figure out your risk mitigation plan, right? Because we knew that you're not going to suppress a virus. Viruses are viruses, but you needed a risk mitigation plan that had some definitive end to it. So that would have cost, by the way, a fraction of what ended up happening. And so when HarperCollins said, hey, like, take a look at this, I spent the pandemic sort of chronicling what happened. I kind of wrote 3.5 different books during the time. And at one point, this last book was up to 160,000 words. And my editor is like, Carol, we gotta dial it back. So we got it down to 90,000-ish words. And by the way, it has almost 500 sources. So this isn't just like me making shit up off the top of my head. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all different kinds of sources in there. So like everything is like deeply sourced. But the clear story was that there were decisions being made, in particular economic decisions, that were not being made by science. It was being made based on who had economic clout and who had power.
Okay.
Right? There's no reason why my hairdresser couldn't do my hair, do my nails, but the large big box pet store next door could do a dog's nails. Like there's no scientific reason for that. The same thing, why was Amazon's warehouse deemed essential the entire time, but like another small business is shut down? So these kinds of things, and as we talked about before, if we all shared in the pain, it probably would have lasted 2 or 3 weeks. So I wanted to explore that. But as I was exploring that, it really got into this bigger discussion of decentralization versus centralization, or central power. And I think this is the battle that's going on, right? So it's what you guys are doing, individual retail investors versus the big guys on Wall Street. It's what's going on in crypto. There's no faith in the Fed or Wall Street. So we've got crypto and DeFi that's trying to decentralize finance. We have small business who is like decentralization of the economy. You have gig workers who's decentralizing the normal corporate job. I mean, that is the movement. People want that economic freedom. And it's the reason why historically people have come here from all over the world to try to take control and pursue whatever route it is to their objectives. And by the way, not everybody's objective is financial, all different kinds of objectives, but whatever it is, having that freedom and choice to do what you want to do is important. But what I've seen, and obviously COVID was the big example, is that over like the past 20 years, there has been a concerted effort to move away from that decentralization to centralized power between the government and big businesses and special interests. Because again, it's easier for the government and politicians to deal with a few thousand big businesses than it is to deal with 30.2 million pre-COVID small businesses. Same thing on Wall Street. Bunch of hedge funds that all know each other is great. Like millions of retail investors, well, that's kind of inconvenient. We don't know what's going on. We're not in control. And I also think there's potentially some arrogance about it too, right? Like we don't want everyone to know that we're not the smartest guys and we just got lucky and anybody could have this opportunity. So we need to preserve this opportunity just for us so other people don't find out that, oh, you can do it too and we're not that smart. So I think there's a little bit of that there too. But anyway, so I wanted to kind of explore what's happened and how we've kind of moved away from free market capitalism towards the central planning and how that's so destructive for our economic freedom. And we are in America, the only bastion of that. We're the only place that stands up and protects the right of the individual and the individual's right to economic freedom. So if we lose that battle, then like we're completely screwed. I don't know what's going to happen. So I wrote that as sort of this rallying cry for the small guy to really put attention. And so, the fact that like you guys are having the same battle, it's like there's just such alignment, it's why I'm just so energized by everything you're doing.
That's awesome. I'm definitely excited to read it myself. Before you sign off, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? What socials do you want to plug? Where can people find you?
Yes. So I'm mostly on Twitter at Carol JS Roth. People always forget the JS, but Carol Roth was taken and it was just too much stuff that's kind of been out there legacy. So that's the best place to find me. And if you need to contact me personally, I will do my best. I try to be helpful to people. Obviously I'm in book launch time, so it's a little bit crazy, but like, I don't care if you have a following of 5 people and you want me to talk to you, like I will do my best to make time. It may be a few months down the road, but like, you're no less important just because you're starting out versus somebody who's got a huge audience like Matt does. Like, you're all important, and so I want you to know that. So go to my website, carolroth.com, and there is a contact form there. And yes, by the way, I know it's super outdated, but I don't make money directly from that, and we're super busy, so we just decided we don't care, which is also an important lesson in entrepreneurship. You can't do everything, so if it's not directly contributing to revenue, like, you just don't worry about it. But reach out, and if there's a way I can be helpful, I will always do my best to be helpful. I can't promise a result, but if there's something that you want, like, I'm an open resource. And then if you tweet to me also and like I don't see it, try again in a couple days, because I get like thousands and thousands of people who reach out, and I'm just not on 24 hours a day, thank God. So I missed it, but like, hopefully you guys have like gotten the vibe that I'm here to be helpful and to be a resource. So if there's something that within reason that I can do, I will try to do that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know the apes really, really enjoyed it, and we'll get this posted later, but I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, thanks so much, Matt. Hopefully we'll chat again.
Will do. Thank you. Have a